So you can view this webinar later. You can share it with a colleague who wasn't able to attend. And if you don't want to be recorded, you can always just turn your camera off. And then finally, we're not anticipating any disruptions to today's webinar, but should anything occur, we will end the meeting and then just email all registrants afterward. So with that, today we're very excited to be joined by Fichter from MassDOT, who is going to provide an overview of the new round of funding for the Shared Streets and Spaces program. And then we'll hear two presentations from Cassani of Quincy and then Kathleen Keresey from West Stockbridge, who are going to share more about two projects that they've advanced with Shared Streets and Spaces funding. And then finally, Jen Kaplan from our economic development team is going to provide a brief procurement update. And then, as I mentioned, we'll move into time for questions and discussion. So I think with that, Kate, I will go ahead and turn things over to you.
Thank you so much, Kasha, and thank you everybody for including me and for hosting this event. And to all the participants out there, I'm sorry I can't really see most of you, but thank you for coming in this strange holiday week of 2020. I'm actually going to try to start with a poll. This is my first time, so everybody bear with me. But if folks can see it and fill it out, that would be really helpful just to give me some context. Typically, this is something I would do with a raise of hands, but this seems to be about the best version of that for what we have. And thank you. I see lots of folks are doing it now. I guess quickly, let me just introduce myself. Again, my name is Kate Fichter. I am an assistant secretary at the Massachusetts Department of Transportation. I've been there for a long time. I know a lot of folks on this call, but certainly not everybody. So it's nice to meet those I don't. I have, since about May, had the honor and responsibility of running our Shared Streets program. This is not really something that's typically a part of my work portfolio, but it has been incredibly interesting and rewarding for reasons that I will talk about in my presentation, and also for reasons that have a lot to do with everybody in the virtual room here. So I am seeing the results. I assume that everybody else is. It looks like about 65% of the people who responded saw some sort of shared streets work or installation in their municipality this spring and summer. And a full 69% anticipate additional work coming up, which is great. And that's actually one of the points I really want to emphasize as we go through things today. So, all right, I'm going to try to share my screen. Let me know. Kasha, can you see that okay? Okay, awesome.
Yep, good.
All right. So what I mainly want to talk about today is the new phase of the Shared Streets program, which we're calling the Shared Winter Streets and Spaces. Oops, go away. Kasha, how do I make my poll go away?
Okay. It closed on my end. Is it closed on yours?
It popped back up, but hopefully it will stay away. But I do actually want to start just by talking a little bit about what the new program is, and then I will go briefly into what we did in the spring, summer, and fall, and then go into more detail on what we're trying to do today. So as actually with a lot of help from people who are participating today, the first phase of the Shared Streets and Spaces program, which we ran from June to September, was incredibly successful. It far exceeded our hopes and dreams. The program was established kind of on the fly, particularly for MassDOT, which doesn't tend to do things quickly. We wanted to find some way to respond to the struggles that we knew municipalities were having in the face of COVID, that everybody was having in the face of COVID. It took us a while to figure out what a transportation agency might be able to offer. And what we ultimately came around to was providing state money to cities and towns to make changes to their streets of the types that we saw happening around the country and around the world. And actually there were a lot of projects in Massachusetts that got off the ground before we ever got involved. The new program, essentially the same in many ways. I will talk about the ways in which it is different. We have been given $10 million this time from the Commonwealth, which is a huge amount of money, particularly right now. And is a huge testament to the popularity of this program and the faith that state government has in it. We will be giving grants between $5,000 and $500,000, which is a bit of an increase over what we saw in the spring and summer, to make improvements to streets, parking, sidewalks, curbs, plazas, you name it. Again, the same basic mission to support public health, safe mobility, and renewed commerce during this period of public health crisis and whatever falls on after. And the application process has been slightly simplified, which I will go over in detail because I want to make sure folks leave today feeling like they understand what's required to be part of the program. And the eligibility criteria have also expanded, which I am excited about. We heard a lot of feedback while the program was running in the spring and summer, and we really wanted to respond to that and attempt to kind of emphasize and encourage different types of projects that we were seeing. So hopefully we got it right. So quickly, Shared Streets 1.0, as we call it, the first phase of the program, ultimately gave out $10.2 million. Some people may recall that we started with $5 million. That was an increase to 10 million, and in the end, we actually overspent even that and had to come up with an additional 200,000. We could have funded much more. The list of interest, the depth of interest seemed practically bottomless. And we had many projects, good projects that we had to say no to, and we hope that they will come back in a variety of forms. But with that 10.2 million, we funded 123 projects in 103 municipalities across the state. Huge range of types of communities, geographic diversity, every type of diversity, big, small, rural, urban. It was one of our most sort of well-dispersed programs, certainly that I've ever seen. And 60% of the municipalities that received grants are considered to be environmental justice communities, which is something of which we are very proud, and we want to continue that as we move forward. So some of this will look familiar for anyone who dug into Shared Streets 1.0, but the project types that we are looking to fund now, so we have these different, so these types, let me quickly talk about what they are. The Main Streets program is really what we called outdoor dining in the first round. This is focused on commerce, on bringing activation and life to downtown centers, village centers, commercial areas, kind of you name it. And we're open to lots of different ideas. This is the one that's really kind of most focused on the challenges of winter. And we're really hoping for a lot of creativity. And I know there's been a lot of thinking about this. But anything that we can do to kind of get people outside, moving around, buying stuff, enjoying their communities will be incredibly important. What we're calling Reimagine Streets, this is pretty much verbatim from what we had in the first round, but this is really about walking and biking infrastructure with quite a bit of granularity to it. In this, we are also emphasizing, as we did in the first round, routes for school children, routes for seniors. We've added a couple of new categories, including routes to open space and to parks, and also to transit, particularly bus transit, which connects then to our desire to see more projects for bus lanes. We did get a number in the first round. We're hoping to get more, both from the MBTA and from the RTAs this time. Shared mobility is a new category. It was sort of buried in the first round, but we're really trying to pull it out this time. This is specifically to pay for the capital costs of new bike share equipment. So docks, bikes, essentially. We are encouraging all municipalities, whether they currently are part of a Blue Bike system or another system, or they're not, and they're looking to start it up. There is money available to help get people over the initial investment hump, and we really want to be part of that. And then what we're calling investments in the future is to convert Shared Streets projects from the summer that were intentionally temporary or pilots to make them into permanent facilities. And we are not picky about whether these are projects that we funded or that were funded in some other way. We really want to see the projects that were done that were successful. We want to see them made real and permanent. So the program details for this phase, as I said, every municipality is eligible as they were last time. We have also added in all the transit authorities can be direct applicants. They don't have to apply through municipality this time. $10 million is the full budget for the program. Awards are $5,000 to $500,000. And one thing that we are doing differently, people may remember that we were accepting applications basically on a weekly basis for the 3 months of the first phase. That was really challenging for us, and we know it was challenging for applicants. So we're now going to be making decisions once a month over 4 months, which gives everybody a little more breathing space. And I will show you in a second what the deadlines are for applying. But the hope is just to make it a little less of a frenzied sprint as we move through it this time. And again, improvements can be temporary or can have the potential to be permanent, as we did the first time. Projects must be substantially completed by May 31st. I'm so excited that I stumbled over my words. This is the #1 most frequent question that we get. When does the project have to be done? When does the money have to be spent? We know that we set really aggressive timelines in the summer. We did that very intentionally. We recognized that it was really tough for everybody to meet. We're hoping May 31st allows us to get far enough into the construction season that it can be workable. But this is the deadline for projects in the ground and for money spent. I will say it again and again, but I just wanted to say it loudly here. So one important point, and this is with a tip of my hat to the Bar Foundation and Solomon and MAPC and all of our partners in this effort. One of the most important pieces of the first phase of the program was the pro bono technical assistance that was available to municipalities. Very generously, the Bar Foundation and our other partners have made this available again. I really, really encourage municipalities to take advantage of it. I believe that some of my fellow panelists worked with the TA team in the summer. It seemed to be tremendously helpful for municipalities. It does a lot of things. It levels the playing field for municipalities of all different resource levels and capacity levels and levels that they've thought about this stuff in the past. It speeds up the design process. It takes the pressure off of our staff. It's incredibly valuable, and I really do hope that people take advantage of it. So how we are doing the timeline this time, we have, as you see here, application deadlines 1 per month. Well, I guess January you sort of get to. The idea is that it's supposed to be 1 per month. And then we will make the notification, 3 to 4 weeks thereafter. These are the final deadlines. Applications do not have to come in on this day, but they do have to come in by this day in order to be considered in that round. If they don't make it, we will consider them in the next round. This is all on our website. I hope that MAPC can make this presentation available somehow after, but these are just the important dates to kind of keep in mind. So some key questions that we certainly heard, the first couple of months and that we've heard recently, I wanted to make sure to kind of make a double point of today. The first is, if you received a grant in the previous round, can you apply again? Yes, absolutely, please do. We are, of course, always looking for municipalities that we have not funded in the past, but yes, absolutely, please do not feel that there is either a rule or honor or valor that keeps you from applying again. We really want to get as many applications as we can. The one caveat to that, which is a little bit different from the last time, is that we are at least to start putting a single grant award limit on municipalities. There were a bunch of municipalities in the first round that they got multiple grants. That was kudos to them for having great projects that they were able to put in, and we were super happy to fund those projects. But in general, if we have a lot of demand, we want to be able to spread the funding around. So where we are starting is a limit of 2 applications, of which one we will fund. And if you have questions or concerns about that, please don't hesitate to let us know. A couple other questions that have been sort of standard questions throughout the program. The first is that retroactive project costs cannot be funded using shared streets grants. We don't have a way to do it. So if 6 months ago you bought a whole lot of heaters, that's awesome, good for you for thinking ahead, but we can't then fund them backwards. If you buy heaters 2 months from now, that we can probably do. Municipalities and public transit authorities are the eligible applicants. And again, this is a really key point for the bureaucrats like me out there. This is money that is paid in advance. This is not a reimbursement program like everything else we do. This is a straight up grant program. It will be deposited into your bank account, and you can then start to spend the money right away rather than having to spend it out of pocket up front and then wait for us to pay you back. So I wanted to emphasize a little bit kind of what we are looking for in projects. Much of this is similar to what we were looking for before. I assume not any big surprises. A few of these things are new or are tweaks. I do want to say that even if a project doesn't hit any of these things, it doesn't mean that we don't want to see it. But these are the sort of types of things that we really want to try to encourage and build on. The first is permanence. As I mentioned before, we are actually looking to fund things that were pilots in the spring and summer to turn them into permanent installations. Likewise, for new projects, we're always looking for ones that have the potential to become good and permanent. Equity, again, incredibly important, and we're actually kind of strengthening this criteria by, in addition to using the environmental justice criteria that we all use, we're also adding additional bonus points for communities who have a median income below the statewide median income, which is something that we use for some other programs as well. We definitely want to create and improve access to transit in any number of ways. If a municipality is designated as a higher risk COVID-19 community, that is also something that we are looking to support, do whatever we can. Really looking for projects that improve safety and accessibility to schools, to facilities and routes for seniors, and for open space. And then lastly, and this is something I'm happy to talk about more in the questions that people want to, we made a conscious choice the first time around to not micromanage the local engagement processes that municipalities were doing around these projects. We kind of wanted to see what would happen. And we also sort of figured that if something was really unpopular or non-viable for some reason, that the sort of local feedback loop would work, and the project would be modified to meet those concerns. We got enough pushback and we heard enough concerns that we actually, this time around, are going to require that municipalities have at least done a public notice process, sort of the bare minimum. And there will be extra points if the project is something that has been identified or developed through some sort of other planning or public process that can sort of demonstrate a level of public engagement and support. Ineligible things, probably as important, if not more important than what is actually eligible. Always good to go through. Projects that basically are repair jobs, we really don't want to fund. That's what Chapter 90 money is for. We know there's never enough, but that's what Chapter 90 is for. That's what other things are for. If there's a broken sidewalk or an old sidewalk that needs to be fixed, we will certainly consider it if you're expanding it, if you're making it better, if you're making it longer. But if it's just a straight up repair, that's really not what this program is for. As I mentioned, we can't fund costs that were incurred before the notice to proceed. We don't fund operating costs. The money that we're using is capital money, again, for the bureaucrats out there. So we really can't pay any type of operating or ongoing maintenance. Projects on private property are not eligible unless we get in writing that there's some sort of agreement with the property owner, and we did get a few of those. But they're tricky, and I tend to encourage municipalities to focus on truly public property. Projects cannot detour or suspend public transit service. They cannot obviously impede routes of travel for people with disabilities. If you skip down one, they also cannot impede access to bike lanes. They also cannot repurpose parks or parkland for any sort of commerce or transportation. We can't fund police details or law enforcement, and we can't fund electronic message boards. We got quite a few proposals in the first round for just message boards, not part of sort of a larger project. And that really kind of wasn't what we were looking to do. And lastly, this is something that has just come up now, not so relevant in the summer, but while we can pay for heaters, we cannot pay for sort of ongoing maintenance contracts related to heaters. So here is the website for how to apply. I know that's a bit of a lot to write down, but if you just Google MassDOT Winter Shared Streets, you will find it. Final deadline is February 26th. Please, please, please think about applying. Here are resources. One of the things that we did over the last couple of months with a lot of help is develop an enormous library of photos. And it's really, really cool. And I really encourage people to look at it. And it's inspirational, and it's grounding, and it's really helpful. And we also have a lot more information on some of these more granular questions related to the program and what's eligible and what's not. And that is the email address. Please feel free to send any and all questions. No questions are too quirky or strange. We've maybe heard them before, and if not, we'd like to. And then this is a crazy quilt of a lot of the different kinds of projects we have funded. So what I will do, I'll stop here. But again, since this presentation is going to be made available after this, there are a whole bunch of slides in the rest of the presentation that go through in detail the different project types. I don't want to take the time to do that now, but this is here if folks are interested. So I will stop. Thank you. I think I should stop sharing my screen. I assume that's what I'm supposed to do. And there we go. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Great. Thank you so much, Kate. That was a lot of really good, useful information about this new round of funding. Just quickly, one quick clarifying question that came up. Could you remind us, will the maximum award amount be allocated for each of the 4 funding rounds?
So we have $10 million to cover the entire program. So that's all 4 funding rounds. We have not set really a spending limit for each of the rounds. The one thing I will say, actually, I failed to mention is that this time around, the different project types actually have cost caps. Last time we just had a single cap for all of the project types, and we realized obviously some types are more expensive than others. So that's sort of the only limit that applicants should be aware of going into any individual application.
Okay, that's helpful. And then we have one other question here. You mentioned that you can't repurpose public parks for outdoor dining. But in the project type description, there is, some mention of investing in repurposing streets, plazas, sidewalks, curbs, and parking areas. So I think if you could just clarify whether or not we could repurpose public parks for outdoor dining.
Sure. So I think, so there's sort of a couple of issues here. And I think that one of the tricky things that has been with us since the beginning of the kind of shared streets concept is how to put public investment into sort of private enterprise, essentially. And the compromise that we came to with ourselves was that we are more than happy to fund outdoor dining, commerce, whatever it may be, if it makes use of publicly owned infrastructure and if it is available to everybody. So that's kind of the issue with parks. Like some sort of private enterprise can't take over a park and like limit the people who can use it. It's got to remain open. So the kind of thing that we saw that tended to be successful that did make use of those kinds of spaces were municipalities that put out tables, chairs, whatever, not necessarily associated or owned by a particular restaurant, but just sort of available to everybody. That's a great way to do it. Other than that, you can start to run into Article 97 issues for people who are familiar with that, but it's really more a question of sort of how do you share public resources most fairly.
Okay. That's helpful. And then Angela, if you have a follow-up question, please chime in the chat. I know that was Angela Cleveland's question. And then related to that, so I know in Cambridge, there's often blue bike stations in public parks as part of Safe Routes to School. So that would be eligible then for shared streets and spaces funding?
Yeah, I mean, if it's a municipally owned park, I'm trying to think. I mean, I can't picture like a blue bike station like on grass or on green space, but yes, I mean, we'd have to see the individual situation, but by and large, yes, particularly if the municipality is comfortable with it.
Just 2 more quick clarifying questions, then I want to go ahead and turn things over to our other presenters. And again, if folks have more questions for Kate, please continue to populate them in the chat and we'll circle back to some of these when we have time for broader questions and discussion. So first question from Brian Pigeon, can unexpended funds from the first round of grants be repurposed for newly eligible project types?
So this is a complicated question and we've had 1 or 2 municipalities ask this. I think I'm going to have to, the answer is like, maybe sort of, it depends on the specifics. I think what I will need you to do, unfortunately, Brian, is to email the Shared Streets email box with like details of what the situation is, and then we can try to work it through with you. It's not as simple as just moving the money from one thing to the other, but we can definitely talk about what the specifics are.
Great. And then last question for right now, can municipalities purchase sidewalk snow clearance equipment to make safe walking routes this winter? This question's from Wendy Landman.
Hello, Wendy. So yeah, so that's something we have been thinking about since we first started thinking about doing a winter program. And I know that there's supposed to be a procurement piece of this presentation, and I hope that snow removal equipment is part of that conversation. Where we have sort of come to is yes, but ideally part of sort of a larger project. It's a bit the same way we feel about tables or umbrellas. We don't just want to buy equipment. We would like to fund sort of a whole concept. So if there's a new sidewalk that's being built that needs snow clearance equipment, then yes. If there's a new trail that's being opened that needs snow clearance equipment, then yes. We're not sort of in the business, not that we don't want to, but we're not in the business of sort of supplying DPWs. So it has to be part of sort of a larger idea. But we're certainly aware of the need, and we want to try to figure out a way to help if we can.
Great, that's a good flag for our procurement folks as well. Kate, thank you so much. We'll return to some more of these questions towards the end when we get to the discussion and question portion of our agenda. I do want to keep things moving forward and now turn it over to Chris Cassani with the City of Quincy to talk more about a project that the city has advanced with shared streets and spaces funding. So Chris, whenever you're ready. Just a quick flag, Chris, if you are presenting, you're on mute, so I don't think folks can hear you.
There we go. All right, very good. Can you hear me now? I hope so.
Yes, perfect.
All right, very good. My name is Chris Cassani. I am the Director of Traffic and Parking in the City of Quincy. And, I just want to say, I can't say enough good things about the folks at DOT for, this the way that this whole program came into fruition and has been executed. I think that there are a lot of really great developments with how the program was administered, and really the encouragement to think about to think boldly with some of these solutions. So in Quincy, we did something that really was geared more heavily to transportation improvement as opposed to an outdoor dining situation. In large part because we felt that the outdoor dining component of the program was being done pretty well by the restaurants in the city for a variety of different reasons. So what we selected was a large corridor in our city that had a number of very, very serious issues relative to pedestrian safety. So Quincy Avenue, if anyone's familiar with Quincy, carries roughly 25,000 vehicles per day. It connects Quincy and Braintree. And it's kind of an old type of road where it's a 4-lane cross section and it's meant for cars and it's not really meant for anyone else. It had high incidence of pedestrian collisions and fatalities. In our department, we had looked at a number of different potential fixes over the course of time, but we hadn't implemented anything as of early 2020. When the shared streets concept came up, we were in the throes of what is happening in a lot of different places across the country. We have the roads have become less safe this year. It's terrible. We know that this is the case. We know speeding is up. We know fatalities are up. We looked at this particular project, reducing a 4-lane cross section down to 3, as something that could be done that would have an immediate and we hope long-term lasting impact to keep people safe, to encourage more walking, and I think in many respects to sort of take the curse off of a very dangerous corridor so that many people, especially elderly people, would give more consideration to walking on some of these key corridors. So again, what we did, we took a 4-lane cross section over roughly a little less than a mile, and we reduced it from 4 lanes down to 3. We installed a brand new pedestrian crossing at a place where we've had some fatalities in the past. It also dovetails nicely with some of the MBTA stops in the area and sort of desire lines over to some of the commercial activity along this corridor. And in the space that we recouped from vehicles, we were able to install bike lanes on either side of the road for the first time. So all of this has had a really positive effect, we think, on getting people through that area more safely, helping people on side streets turn a little bit more easily. But it has really, I think, changed the entire mentality of commuting along that stretch. One of the nice things about it is that we didn't make traffic any worse. These are charts that show the travel time, before and after the road diet went in place. We're talking a matter of seconds, if anything, really, where things have maybe slowed down a little bit. What it shows you is that, if you're driving 45 miles per hour on a very small stretch of road and you go to 32 miles per hour, you're far more in control of your vehicle, but you're also just not getting anywhere much slower. So it's really a negligible difference on that front, while a huge improvement for everybody who's utilizing the road. And I would just, offer, some lessons and advice from Quincy. It is possible to select a bold concept and execute it. Again, this is a road with 25,000 vehicles on it. This is a road that, people were pretty aware of, though, the safety precautions that came with it. We had good support from the Ward 2 counselor and from the mayor's office to go forward and put something like this in place. I would also add that, we had what we believe were really good contracts in place to allow us the flexibility to do this project. I think if you don't have good contractual mechanisms in place, you may run into a situation where you're not as able to line up a contractor in as timely a fashion. So obviously, in this particular grant funding round, if you were to select something that is, line striping or curb work, we're running into the winter, which is not typically the time where you're even able to do those things, even if you wanted to. So the more trusted vendors you have kind of in your orbit, the better. I would recommend on line striping work, if you can qualify multiple companies to do that sort of work, if that's what you're angling towards, you would benefit from that for a potential shared streets grant. And you would also benefit from it just in general, especially if those contracts are multi-year contracts, as allowed through state procurement laws. It's interesting too, I think, especially in a smaller municipality, to collaborate with your DPW to understand who is working in your town or city already. If you have a contractor that's in place, if it's been bid with all the right, terms and conditions so that it could be utilized for a separate DOT funded project, I think that would be all the better. Especially if it's a planning department getting involved in something like this for the first time. And I know from sharing the podium at the Moving Together conference last year, that can be an issue. A little bit more collaboration between the DPW and maybe the planning department can really go a long way to making the execution of the project feasible. And I think going back to the conversation about the communication strategy, we had really good support from our Ward 2 counselor to do this. Obviously engaging the community is different than it used to be. And in some ways, there's the ability to get more input than there had been in the past. So I think it's very important to get the buy-in from whoever the select person is or the ward counselor, whatever the case is. And they can be a real ally to solve a problem, especially if everyone recognizes, as we did, that you had both a speeding issue and a pedestrian connectivity issue. So like I said, in all, an absolutely wonderful project, something that is permanent. I think the idea, you certainly could undo what we did, but I don't know why in a million years you'd ever want to. It's working well. We think it will work well moving forward. And like I said, I just would say, don't be afraid to do something bold. If you have that confidence in your analysis that the type of improvement you'll add will be really beneficial for those road users who are so vulnerable, especially in the wintertime when it's dark, cold, and everything else. So that is the end of my presentation. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to share.
Thank you so much, Chris. I really appreciate hearing more about your project and the good work that's happening in Quincy. I invite folks to drop in if they have any questions in the chat. One thing that I'm wondering, now that public engagement is a little bit more of a component for this new round of shared streets and spaces funding, were there any particular strategies or kinds of meetings or outreach that you did that you thought was particularly helpful in building support for your project?
Well, in our particular case, I think the best way to answer that would be to say we did have a few allies crop up to support the project. It can't hurt to have someone, if you have a weekly newspaper like we do here in Quincy, to write a letter saying, hey, we think that something needs to happen over here. And by the way, we support this potential solution. So, you can be a little bit strategic, I guess, in sort of recruiting people to be on your side. But, you know, it is important. So often you hear from the people who don't like something, they'll instantly respond, whereas people who support it might never tell you. So kind of anticipating that to get a little bit of buy-in ahead of time, I don't think is a bad idea, depending on, you know, the way you go. Obviously, a restaurant community would be thrilled to get the type of support, but who's advocating for the pedestrian, right? You know, in this area, we have Walk Boston, but when you think about the thousands and thousands of people who are walking around, they don't have as many advocates out there. So you kind of have to do some of the advocacy work. You have to be their partner in some respects to advocate for your own project by helping them support you.
Yeah, I like that thought a lot of engaging the restaurant community in this as well. We know how crucial foot traffic is to our storefronts, restaurants, all of that. So thank you so much, Chris, for your presentation. Again, folks, please feel free to chime in with questions. So with that, I'd like to take us over to the other end of the Commonwealth and invite Kathleen Keresey to present on a project happening in West Stockbridge. Kathleen? I think you're on mute still.
Hi, everyone. I'm sorry, I just need to minimize my screen. Okay. So I would like to also thank MassDOT for the opportunity to be here today, but also for the town of West Stockbridge to be able to participate in this grant program has been really a very transformational experience, I'd say. We're a very small town and don't have the types of resources that we've been now allowed to put into our town for beautification, for development of open spaces, and most particularly to help our restaurants and arts foundations in this really tough time. Our businesses were, and this is nothing new, it's certainly our businesses were really suffering and not quite knowing where to turn when this grant opportunity came around. We have in West Stockbridge, as I said, we're small. We have just a little over 1,600 residents, full-time, and a lot of second homeowners. Our government is small, so we don't have a lot of infrastructure to respond to something like this traditionally. We have 3 essentially volunteer select board members, of which I am one, and newly minted, I would say. We have a strong Department of Public Works who were really helpful in this process. A town administrator who has her hands quite full and wasn't, while she's been really instrumental in helping this grant along, has not been able to put the sort of full-time effort in it that it required. So when we, actually in my very first select board meeting, I came in saying, oh, I heard about this kind of cool opportunity. Should I investigate it? And here we are a few months later, and having benefited or are currently benefiting by the award of over $141,000, which is sizable for our town. So that said, when the grant was awarded, we said, oh my, this is wonderful. Well, now how are we going to implement all of this? So it was a bit of challenge. Following up on what Kate said in her introduction, I would really encourage people to avail yourself of the technical assistance that's available. We couldn't have done it without the backing of the Bar Foundation, who funded Kittleson and Associations, who we worked with. They were really tremendously helpful in helping us identify what types of projects would be appropriate for our town. Were they appropriate for the grant, to develop concepts, design, and implementation plans. So I would suggest to other towns, municipalities, large and small, that would be something that would be really, we found tremendously important. And I have some slides that I can present to you in just a minute, which sort of show you what the concept development looks like from the technical assistance side. very different from what they did in Quincy and what Chris described. In our case, our main goal was to enable our restaurants and our arts foundations and our historical society to be able to meet the challenges that the pandemic was presenting mostly by bringing businesses outdoors into public spaces and streets and sidewalks. And so we've done that in large part by providing, through the grant, tables and chairs, umbrellas, planters, signs, street blockage. We've tried to do everything as aesthetically pleasing as we could, and respond in timely enough fashion to help these businesses get outside. Heat lamps became obviously more important as the season wore on. And one interesting aside, and again, very different than a sort of infrastructure, was that this was a fairly emotional process for a lot of people's, our participants' parts, because it meant really the survival, or in some cases, potential failure, or at least lowering of what the ability to make a living would be. People were really very, very emotional about the funding and the opportunities that it gave them. We had 5 restaurants and also 3 key outdoor spaces in our downtown, which were either being used unofficially as parking lots or underutilized. So what we did is, secondary to getting our restaurants and businesses out, we took advantage of trying to develop these spaces for gatherings, for dining, for play, for arts, and safe meeting places for our townspeople. And because we are a significant tourist destination for our tourist population. And the third thing that was a focus for us was traffic calming. We are a small town, an old town, and we are at the juncture of 2 state highways. So we have a lot of truck traffic, the Massachusetts Turnpike. This is exit 1 on the Massachusetts Turnpike. We have a lot of traffic through town. So traffic calming has been something that we've been trying to tackle as a municipality for a long time. This grant really enabled us to be able to attack that a little bit more aggressively. Some of the hurdles that I would suggest, as everyone knows, and as everyone has mentioned, the time frame was short, intentionally so, but it did present its own challenges. So one thing that I would advise other communities who are looking to be involved in the grant is to be prepared to mobilize even while you're awaiting a decision. And in our case, that meant identification of some of our key players up front. Because we were dealing with individually owned businesses, restaurants, or managed arts organizations, our key players were not so difficult to identify. But going forward, we know that for our next round, we'll definitely intend to have more buy-in from the town. We're arranging to have a special select board meeting next week where we're looking for input from our townspeople and business owners alike. We called on volunteers. Our town, a lot of the work that gets done here gets done by volunteers, and it is often the same pool of volunteers, but they showed up once again and really helped us out. The Department of Public Works, as I mentioned, went far and above for us in being able to, they built picnic tables for us. They carried equipment, they moved planters. They've just been really wonderful in helping us implement this grant. One interesting thing, because we were dealing with individual businesses and restaurants and associations, was deadlines. We attempted to be really very democratic in our process and finding out what everyone's individual needs were and have them buy into the process in choosing things that would be akin to what the aesthetic of whatever their establishment was. We did find a lot of people drag their feet. We didn't want to put deadlines on people. We weren't sure how that would actually work with MassDOT. You can't say to someone, you can do this, but you have to do it by now or you're excluded. So we did find that that really made our process drag, and was just, it became, from the administration side of it, a little bit difficult to be sort of on people's tails to say, have you gotten me the list of what you need? You know, you're holding up the whole grant at this point in time. And it did come down to that in a couple of instances for us. So I would say at the beginning of your process, if you're dealing with the population like we were, you know, really put some policy in place around proactivity on the people's part who would potentially be benefiting. As everyone knows, I think procurement became somewhat of an issue. MassDOT offered assistance with that as well. We found, because we are a municipality and we were doing the purchasing, we needed to show our tax exempt certificate. You can't necessarily just go online to the 20 different places that we wanted to buy from and set up accounts in, you know, in the drop of a hat. So so we were a little bit, we didn't think ahead of that, and just that would be something that I'd advise if you're even waiting or think that you might want to go to some, you know, either well-known or obscure playground equipment place, that try to get your paperwork done in advance. In our procurement process, because we are small and we have part-time town treasurer and part-time town accountant, and our procurement response is based on POs and approvals, that was something that we had to address and just ask people within our town government, within our town accounting department, to really try to up the ante on being able to respond to an opportunity like this, because they just weren't set up to do that. So I think that those are basically some of the things that I would advise in looking ahead. Legal issues, we did consult town council because we were putting what would become town-owned property on private land. So we wanted to be sure that we were not in any sort of legal jeopardy. So, and we had a lot of course, participation from our merchants in signing off on that. I think moving ahead, what we'd like to do is, as Kate also mentioned, we want to do involve our townspeople more. So we've put out a public notice, actually, in a paper today. It's going on our website, that we'll hold a special meeting next week. We're asking people to submit their ideas in writing in advance, just finding that in an open meeting, people sort of come in at the last minute and haven't read the grant and haven't thought their things through and want to hear, you know, some ideas being talked about that may just not apply at all. So that's the beginning of our process going forward. And then we plan to put a committee together to take the onus off of, you know, either me personally or our town administrator personally, to say, you know, yay or nay to things, so that we're trying to really open up the democratic process. So I think I've used up my 10 minutes and be happy to answer any questions either here or, you know, if anyone has any questions down the line through email, of course.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. Really appreciate hearing more about how West Stockbridge was able to advance this work in a smaller community. I think that shows that, you know, this program is really flexible, whether you're a large city or a smaller town. You mentioned procurement. I know there are always an endless amount of questions relating to procurement. So with that, I also want to turn things over to Jen Kaplan from our economic development team, who's been doing some work around procurement related to the Shared Streets effort. So Jen?
Thanks, Kasha, and thanks, Kathleen, for that great presentation, and Chris as well for joining us.
Thank you.
I'm going to attempt to share my screen now. And maybe Kasha can give me a thumbs up if everyone can see my screen.
Looks good to me. I think it's just loading right now.
Okay.
Yeah, you may need to try one more time, I think.
Apologize, folks. I know that everyone was waiting for this moment, the most exciting part of the presentation. How's that?
Looks good.
Okay, apologize for not being able to make it full screen. We are getting close to the holidays, so maybe this is the best we're gonna get. So thank you, everybody. I really appreciate everyone staying on for this part before we enter the question and answer portion of today's webinar. I'm not gonna take too long. I'm just your friendly neighborhood planner reminding you some best practices around procurement, which is, as Kathleen has stated, is an incredibly important part of the process. So just some quick reminders before I dive into some resources that we have, in addition to actually some people have joined us today as resources for the question and answer portion. So procurement is really important. When you're applying to the MassDOT grants, you're going to have, at some point, you're going to start thinking about the materials that you need during the construction and implementation process. And the best thing that you can do is start the conversation early. Contact your procurement officer as soon as you start putting together this application, when you start having these ideas. If you don't have a procurement officer, that's okay too. We understand that not every community does. So that might mean getting in touch with your city manager or anyone in the town office who is able to help you with what sort of processes are currently in place for your community around procurement of materials. And I would be amiss if I just did not remind folks that the regular procurement process is a 30B process for your town. Because there is an emergency order in place, that 30B process can be bypassed. Some more information on that is actually within the vendor guide that I'm going to talk about a little bit later. And if you have anything that requires construction, that is a 3039M process. We actually have our general counsel from MAPC, who is also on the call today, who will be able to speak to this so much more eloquently. But I did want to outline sort of the larger processes that are in place for folks to think about as they approach their project. So I mentioned earlier, just now, that we have 2 guides in place. So those are uploaded on our Shared Streets website. One is a state contracts guide and the other is a vendor guide. The state contracts guide has a ton of resources from the OSD state contracts. And we actually have some folks from OSD who have joined us today on this call and who have offered to be a resource during the question and answer session. And so we're joined by Danielle Frizzi, Brendan McHugh, and Joanna Curry. So thank you for being here today. But when you flip through the state contracts guide, you'll see that there are many different contracts through OSD state approved vendor lists. We also have included some additional agency resources, as well as some contracts also from MAPC's procurement process as well. So that, again, is uploaded on the website. The vendor guide that we have is non-state approved vendors, however, is a pretty extensive list at this point that we have all vendors from, around the country, and many that are local, that are supplying materials that we have seen have been used during the first round of Shared Streets projects. And we've also included some new vendors to anticipate some more winter-friendly projects as well. So I encourage folks to check that out. And just quickly, finally, to note, in the state contracts guide, you will also see that there is OSD volume purchasing options. So that was the result of some great work that OSD did during the fall, I believe, when we were finding that there were many of the same materials being procured by towns would apply to the Shared Streets Grant. OSD worked with some of their vendors to put together some volume purchasing options that are at a discount. And those are still valid from the fall. So I encourage folks to check that out. There's a lot of stuff in there and a few good vendors and some good pricing. Finally, within the state contracts, guys, I mentioned that there was some MAPC contract, and one of those is the medium and heavy duty construction equipment contract, which includes, I believe, some snow sweepers, and maybe Margie can correct me later. But it's great, and we encourage folks to take a look at it because they are rentals. So if you were not planning on purchasing any snow removal equipment, it's not in your budget, or maybe you just don't have the space for it, check out these rental contracts. There's a few vendors on there that you can definitely take a look at, and the contact for our procurement work at MAPC is also listed on there as well. So that's about all I have to say about procurement. Again, our folks, friendly folks from OSD are here to answer some questions if you really want to get into the specifics of the state contracts guide, and our general counsel, who is just a wealth of knowledge around procurement, Margie Weinberger, is also on the call today. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. And turn it back to Kasha.
Great, thank you, Jen. Also, just want to reiterate, we have Margie Weinberger here on the call, who's our general counsel, and taught me everything that I know about procurement. So if folks have any questions about procurement, please feel free to raise them. Margie, I don't know if there's anything that you want to raise after Jen's presentation.
Just very briefly, I want to stress the issue of emergency procurement is only for truly essential items. So it can't be used just for everything. There's a memorandum inside the documentation regarding emergency procurement and some of the parameters around it. And the IG will very soon, December 3rd, be offering a training on emergency procurement. Please share that with your procurement officers, your legal counsels, and you can sign up online through the document we provide.
Great, thanks, Margie. So now I want to take us into the questions and discussion portion of the agenda. I know we shared a lot of information today, and I know folks have a number of questions related to specific proposals that they're considering. So, I invite folks to turn their cameras on and raise your hand if you have a question, or continue to drop them in the chat. Since some of the questions, often need a little bit more context, I'm going to go ahead and invite folks to unmute themselves and ask their question, but I'll just begin by going through the issues that have already been raised in the chat. So I'm going to start with Charlie Seelig. If you want to unmute yourself and ask your question related to what makes a strong safe routes into school application.
Hi folks. The town, we don't have a downtown per se, so some of the ways that other communities are looking at this program are different than what we have available. What we're trying to do is get more people simply out and about and increase our sidewalk system. We did apply during the previous round for a sidewalk extension, actually in 2 places. The initial application did not go so well, and we revised it, sent it in again. Again, we weren't successful. So what I'm looking for are ways to strengthen the town's application in that regard. We tried to tie it in, for instance, to the safe routes to school, because the sidewalk system does bring people to school, to a library, to a playground and park and playing field areas that are on that sidewalk system. Obviously, it's going to be a competitive situation, but I'm looking for what might be the missing pieces that we might be able to include that would strengthen our application during this go round.
Kasha, should I take that?
Yeah, I think that's for you.
So I guess my first thing to say is thank you for participating and for trying and for continuing to be interested. And I think sort of blanket comment for everybody again is to use the technical assistance either to help generate an idea, or when there's sort of the germ of an idea but it needs some help, they can be enormously supportive. So I guess a couple of things to think about. So the way we have structured the the slide I went through sort of showing the areas of preference, and this, I believe this is the right way to do it, but if you are not an environmental justice community, if you are not in a COVID red category, again, lucky for you, but those are things that can help put communities in applications sort of over the top. As a sort of general rule, though, I would say that we are looking for projects that bring in a bunch of different elements. So your thinking is exactly right. How do you make a sidewalk project and tie it to a school or tie it to a park? That is exactly the right kind of thinking. Without having your application in front of me, I would suggest, depending on how you structured it, things like ADA ramps, flashing beacons, crosswalks. You know, is there a way to combine it with a temporary bike lane? Is there a way to combine it with connections to other things? We're trying to make these projects as multi-dimensional as possible. So that's what we are looking for. We do get a lot of projects that are simple crosswalk replacements or beacon installations or signage installations. And sometimes, depending on the specifics of the municipality and of the application, they can make it to be funded. But those are tougher sells than ones that bring in a whole bunch of different pieces. And my observation was going through the first round that the TA providers were helpful in kind of building out a more complex project.
Thank you.
The next question that I saw in the chat, Maureen Gary, if you want to ask your question regarding whether heaters need to be included in specific projects.
Oh, hi, thank you. Sorry, I don't know where my video. There we go. Hi, thank you, everyone. So my question was kind of brief. You mentioned that purchasing of heaters can be part of the program, but does it need to be part of a larger program? For instance, you know, repairing the sidewalk, making pedestrian walkways better, you know, in a restaurant street area, not just simply applying to purchase items like heat lamps and somebody else had mentioned, I think it would be Kathleen, tables, chairs, and planters and things like that.
So again, I think it's a similar question and answer to the last one. There's certainly nothing to prevent an application that's simply to purchase heaters or simply to purchase equipment or whatever. It's unlikely to score well. This is a mobility, this is a public health project. Heaters are an incredibly important part of allowing for commerce to be outside, but given the other projects they're likely to be up against, something that's solely heaters is probably unlikely to be funded unless it's part of a bigger concept.
Right. Yeah. No, I understand. Perfect. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Thanks, Maureen. Todd, Blake, do you want to ask your question regarding total expenditure of funds in the spring?
I actually think I saw that question.
Yeah, so some projects may take a little bit longer due to interagency collaboration. Do all funds? Absolutely. I think the question is how firm is that May 31st deadline?
Well, so I actually think what the question was about, so we have set up a requirement that if you received a grant in the first round, the project has to be completed before you are eligible to apply for a second grant or to receive a second grant. This is a requirement that we also have on our Complete Streets program. We're really trying to stick to it. I mean, we understand the challenges of spending money. We certainly understand the challenges that people ran into with procurement. If there's some really exceptional situation, we are always happy to talk about it and try to make it work. But we don't want communities sort of stockpiling money that somebody else could be spending. I'm not unsympathetic to the problem, but we want to see that you can execute the first one before we give you a second one. But if there is some exceptional case, by all means, contact us through the Shared Streets inbox. In terms of the May 31st deadline, again, we're really trying to stick to it. Part of this program is trying to walk a fine line between addressing kind of long-standing mobility municipal needs and being responsive to the COVID crisis. So if we allow things to go on and on and on, they sort of start to fail on the COVID side of the mission. So again, if there's something really exceptional, we're always happy to talk about it. We've worked with a lot of communities in the first round that had deadline problems, particularly around procurement. But we really are going to try to hold ourselves and grant recipients to those deadlines.
Great, thanks, Kate. We have a couple of more questions related to what would a successful project look like under X category. So this first one is from Jane D. Biasso. Jane, if you're still on the call, if you'd like to ask your question related to examples of eligible projects under reimagined streets for bicycling.
Yeah, I mean, I can jump in. I think so for bicycling, the types of things that we saw that were successful were striping of new bike lanes, temporary or permanent, flex posts to delineate new bike lanes, temporary or permanent, signage for bikes, new bike connections to trails or to schools or to village centers or to whatever. Basically creating any bike facilities that don't currently exist. The one thing that we do have some hesitation about is sharrows, which we don't really consider to be a particularly great bike accommodation. And depending on the specifics of the design, we may sort of reach out to try to encourage you to consider something that's more segmented. But yeah, basically any new, currently non-existing bike facility, we would love to see.
Great. And then, sort of in that same frame, Ian McElwee, I don't know if you want to expand upon your question around what would successful sidewalk improvements look like?
Yes, so this question sort of on behalf of some of the towns in the central Massachusetts region. I represent their RPA. So some of the questions they have is that they're interested in the program, but they're really looking at sidewalks and sort of what a successful sidewalk application would look like. So what I tried to tell them in the past is that they're really sort of looking at temporary quick implementation, but since we have some more time this winter round, would the they might want to look at the repair and expansion of sidewalks. And so when you say expansion, is it, what would that look like? And would we be looking at sort of temporary materials for these types of sidewalk improvements? Are we looking at more permanent, semi-permanent type of materials that would be acceptable, just to sort of give them an idea of when they do come to us and say, we want to do something related to our sidewalks, what sort of direction I can lead them in?
Sure, absolutely. And we love funding sidewalks. So while we certainly are interested and willing to fund sort of temporary sidewalk improvements or increases, and what we tend to see in the temporary category is like a parking lane being turned into a walking area. But we're really interested in funding permanent sidewalk construction.
Okay.
And there is enough time and there is enough money in the program this time to really, try to do some meaningful sidewalk work. I guess the description for me of a successful sidewalk project is one that meaningfully increases the amount of sidewalk that currently exists, whether it's in length or width. Ideally it connects to like meaningful things. We occasionally saw a sidewalk sort of gap fillers that were like from one residential development to another. Those are kind of a hard sell. But if it's connecting a commercial area or a school or any, recreation, any sort of meaningful municipal civic use, like those are very attractive to us. ADA compliant curb ramps, very important, lighting, street furniture, you name it. Anything that improves the pedestrian experience in some meaningful way, both its safety and the appeal of using it, we're certainly interested in seeing.
Okay, great, thank you.
Sure. And actually to echo Chris's point, one of the things that we saw, particularly in the first like really quick round, was that municipalities that had some sort of contracts in place, on call, whatever it was that allowed them to sort of move pretty quickly, that was very helpful to meet some of the more rigorous deadlines that we had set. And we certainly saw that with sidewalks.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
So I think we just have a couple more questions. I also, in addition to any more questions for Kate or Kathleen that folks may have, I invite you to drop in the comments any ideas that you have for projects, any ways, folks are thinking about creatively reimagining their streets for the winter. So if anyone has any project ideas too, please chime in. But a question that we have from Eric Arbeen is, guidance states that projects to repurpose public parks or parkland for outdoor dining, commerce, or transportation purposes are ineligible. So would this then preclude the eligibility of creating a walking trail in a public park?
I saw that question. I think I would probably have to see the actual project to be able to answer it with 100% confidence. I think, so what we had in mind, we didn't want somebody putting like hardscape through the middle of green space like that. We were looking to avoid that. We are looking to avoid that. I am not the world's greatest expert on Article 97, but it is something to think about if you are thinking about changing how open space is used. But no, I mean, we're not trying to be sort of like stupidly stubborn. If you are looking to sort of improve a park in a way that improves mobility and safety and maybe access to or use of the park, we're not going to say no to that so long as it doesn't sort of violate other principles. But I think to be really, really sure that I'm giving you the right answer, it might be good to talk offline about the specifics of what you're looking at.
And then we have another question here. This might also be a question for legal counsel, but if the cost of the project is higher than the grants fund, can the municipality appropriate the balance from local funding sources? I'm not sure. That might be a question for local legal counsel. I don't know, Margie, too, if you have any thoughts on that.
I mean, certainly from our perspective, yes. And we definitely saw municipalities do that.
There's precedent for that. Okay, that's good to know.
I don't think there's any reason why you can't do that unless the municipality has some kind of limitation.
Paige, do you want to ask your question about funding flashing pedestrian lights?
Sure, sorry, I come back to life. Hi, Kate. So in our town Foxborough area, we tried really hard to find a way to make this shared streets work, but we don't have enough restaurants and businesses yet to really work with it. But under the new program, what we'd love to do is we are trying to improve the outdoor experience uptown. We're doing lighting on our common. We have a potential, we have a brew pub moving into town. So we're creating that downtown area. One of the things we do desperately need, because I said in my comment that our Rotary has 7 legs. We have 15,000 cars traveling through it every day. And that's our common. So flashing, we've had some luck with we have one set of flashing pedestrian lights on demand, and we've been looking at a couple other. Do you think this would be the type of thing for this program? Even though it would be, I mean, like you just said, permanent is better. So this would not only benefit us in the spring or, when we get it launched, but further on, really it's something on our list we really hope to achieve generally. Does that seem?
Yeah, so I mean, we funded a ton of these types of beacons in all kinds of places. I guess the only thing I would say is with a project like this, I'd want to look at the site and at the plan, and we'd probably have our traffic safety people look at it and be sure that they thought that putting in beacons was actually like an effective safety device in a place with so much traffic. But yes, in general, beacons, absolutely. We funded a boatload of them in the first phase, and I hope that we fund a lot more going forward.
Great, thank you.
Sure, of course.
And Todd, Corinne, it looks like you have a similar pedestrian safety question. Do you want to raise that or add any more context?
Looks like Todd's driving. I see that.
Oh, Todd, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, so my question is, I am driving, so I'm trying to do this with my Bluetooth. Hopefully you can hear me. The question I have is, we're going through a project right now to try to upgrade all of our existing traffic signals with APS push buttons and countdown timers to improve mobility and access for sight impaired pedestrians. And is that something that would be eligible for this next round?
It's actually interesting. We didn't get any applications for just that in the first round. I think so, but again, I think as is true with other types of equipment, it would fare better if it was combined with new crosswalks, new ramps, any sort of sidewalk improvements or road treatments. It's just sort of something beyond just the equipment. I'd probably have to see the application to give a little bit more detail, and this might be somewhere where the TA folks could help as well. But certainly it's eligible. It's not something we've heard before, but I think it's eligible.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure.
So I think, so Jen Kaplan is posing a question back to the group. Is anyone planning to work with local artists on a second round of work?
Sorry, I wasn't sure if that was allowed, but I wanted to pose a question right back to this group because it's been so great to have many people here. And if anyone has another question, I do not have to ask this, but you know, something we've seen is some really wonderful public art that's come out in the first round and some great projects. And if you check out the Flickr photos, you'll see many of them posted there. And I'm curious if folks are thinking about or want to work with local artists as part of this second round of work. And Kate too, if you have any thoughts about, you know, MassDOT and what that looks like as part of the application process. But I was really curious, hoping to ask people who are planning on applying what they're thinking.
We definitely did fund it in the first round. Obviously not something we typically fund with transportation money, but so long as it was a larger project that did make use of a street or some other sort of transportation asset. We also saw some projects where there was an art component, but we weren't being asked to fund it. It was donated by the community or funded through a foundation or something. But from what I've seen myself, they're great additions to these projects. Jersey barriers are not beautiful in their natural state.
Thanks, Kate. Yeah.
So I invite folks to chime in the chat if they have any creative placemaking or public art that they're looking to incorporate in any of their projects. Kate, we have another question from Eric about general wayfinding signs being eligible.
Yes, so wayfinding is eligible. Again, we'd have to see it and see if it's sort of part of a larger concept or just sort of signs on their own. But yes, wayfinding is not only eligible, but is actually something that we are looking. If wayfinding is part of a larger project, you will get extra points for it.
Great, good to know. So unless folks have any other questions or comments that they'd like to offer, Kate, I know you got a lot of questions and you shared a lot of really valuable information with the group today. Is there any sort of like key takeaways that you want folks to come away with, or any sort of closing thoughts you'd like to offer this group?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would really encourage people to apply, and I would encourage people to encourage other people to apply. We have not seen, the program's only been open for 2 weeks, but we have not seen many applications come in yet, which is a tiny bit concerning. I think the Commonwealth has made a big bet on this program because it was so successful and effective over the summer, and I really want to keep that going. I don't want it to grind to a halt now, and I fully recognize the challenges of the weather. I've now eaten outside twice, and it is chilly out there. But it's really important for a whole lot of reasons, and this is a chance to fund mobility projects that maybe typically don't rise to the top. So please take advantage of the TA services. Talk to us. We respond to every single email we get. We're happy to work in a really tailored way with municipalities to try to come up with something that's right and effective. So just please do think about applying.
Definitely. And one last bonus question from Jen Constable. Would a non-tradition transportation project like an inner harbor project be eligible? I think it may depend on the specificities of that project. Jen, feel free to chime in too with anything that you're thinking of.
Hi, thanks, Keisha. Yeah, I might be thinking too far outside the box with this question, but so I'm thinking specifically of Hingham Hull. Hull has a downtown area, which, and I believe both communities would have the infrastructure if there was a short, I don't know, let me back up. Thinking Hingham Hull, which again I think has the infrastructure in place that to connect Hull's mostly seasonal, but some year-round businesses with Hingham's downtown area as well as their shipyard. If there's some mode of transportation that we could access for, I don't know the exact distance, but it's a pretty short distance between each harbor to support each of those 3 downtown areas. It
So I
wouldn't be a
guess keep,
bus lane, it wouldn't be a bike route. We would be talking water transportation.
yeah, so it's not something that's come up, and I'm trying to think, since we can't fund operating costs, I think it would be a challenge, but I think we'd have to talk about it and maybe see what, you know, is there a, I'm trying to picture it, is there a bike potential? I know the road. Yeah, I mean, I think certainly something to talk about, but we could not fund the operating costs of a ferry or a hydrofoil or anything like that.
Sure. Okay.
Hey, could you consider a shuttle if they needed to like lease, say, handicap access paratransit vehicles for short ride shuttles in between different commercial districts? Not the operation of it, but the vehicle itself.
I don't think so. That would have to fall to our procurement people. We have other programs that do that, but it would be, I don't think so. I'd have to think about it. It hasn't come up. And we'd probably want to work with the RTA, whatever it is. It's the T, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, if you want to pursue something, by all means, reach out and we can think about it.
Ending on a creative note, I like that. So we'll follow up with presentation materials, that shared streets email that Kate referenced. But I want to extend a big thank you to Kate, Kathleen, Chris, and Jen for offering this space to talk about this new program. I'm really excited to see what projects folks come up with, and some creative ideas for repurposing our streets to stay active in the winter. I will also just say, you know, MAPC is hosting a series of webinars related to COVID response and recovery. We're hosting another webinar on Thursday, December 3rd, related to wastewater testing. So wide variety of topics to cover here. But again, a huge thank you to our speakers, and please feel free to reach out to us if you had a question that we weren't able to address. So with that, I'll close this out. Thank you all so much for your time today. Really
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.